Online learning makes a much more flexible offering. People are able to access at different times, suitable to their schedule. And with today's environment, people need to work. Single parents need to take care of kids.
How can a set of skills lead you down the path to success? That's what we're setting out to answer on the EdUp Canada podcast. I'm your host, Michael Sangster. Join me as we unpack how leaders around the world have taken training and skills and turned that into a lasting career. Now let's learn together. Welcome back to the EdUp Canada podcast, episode 47. No one thought we'd get to number 7, but here we are. And I'm joined today, following up with our interview last week of our new acting COO, Michael Sangster, is someone that he worked with for a very long time, the National Director of Academics from Herzing College, based out of Winnipeg. Great guy. Robin Day is joining us today to talk a little bit about his life in the career college sector and training students. But I just learned something I didn't know. We share something in common. Neither one of us believe in breakfast, do we, Robin?
Absolutely not. Thank you so much for having me on your show there, Michael.
Really looking forward to it. It is we were just chatting before we got on here. We both agree that it's a bit of a waste of time. There's work to do, right? Things to get done.
Things to do. Too much work to do.
And the great thing I found out about our sector is there's often a student waiting at the door when you get there, no matter what time you get there, right?
Always.
They're very excited about the process of getting back to school, being in school, being around people. I know you well enough to know you've embraced online learning and figured out a way to make that work, but you also really enjoyed the classroom, didn't you? And having people around the building?
Absolutely. I do miss being in the classroom. Being in my corporate level is got its own rewards, but being with students really is something special.
And there's a certain amount of energy that's, I don't want to say left the campuses with the more online learning, but there was a pretty special feeling when you walked around these campuses and felt the people still being there. You still have that, though. It's just not quite the same.
We do. You're absolutely right. We don't have as many students on campus, but we do have a number of students. And you're absolutely right as well that there is an energy associated with a lively, active campus, with all of these students wandering around, doing their work, having a break, discussing what's going on in their classes and their lives. It is an energy that nothing really compares to.
Let's go back to the positives, though. I hadn't planned on talking about online learning, but we kind of got here. The positives of it, though, because one of the things that we know is that the colleges offer opportunities that are different from community colleges and universities. And it's not a slight on any other level of education. But with online learning, it opens up more opportunity, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Online learning makes a much more flexible offering. People are able to access at different times, suitable to their schedule. And with today's environment, people need to work. Single parents need to take care of kids. There's no environment in which somebody could just decide, I'm going to take time off from my job and go and get some education. That's just not possible in today's world. So we need to do the two things simultaneously. So we need offerings that are accessible and flexible. And one of the things we've learned about online training is that it cannot be like on-ground training was. I remember going to a lecture that was 3 hours long, and today that simply doesn't fly. First of all, people don't have a 3-hour block that they could designate and devote to one activity. Next, not too many people have the attention span required to focus on something, sometimes a little dull, for 3 hours or more. So we found that bite-sized learning, small modules, is critical, both in the online environment and in our on-ground classes as well. Students need that smaller amounts that they can consume and digest, and then perhaps even go on to something else. I find that single parents in particular have only 15, 20 minutes at a time. They do not have an hour to an hour and a half to devote to watching a video, answering questions, doing an exercise. They need to have just 10 minutes, look at something, watch something, do some work, and then they're off doing something else. And our programs need to be designed to accommodate that.
But you've still got the rigor of the fuller program, and they've got to be there for those hours and those 2-hour periods where they dive in with other people. So it's a balancing act, isn't it?
It really is. It absolutely is. And we do find that being able to connect through multiple times through that week actually creates almost a fresher aspect to the courses themselves, rather than that long slog that people will tend to put off. Somebody looking at, I need to watch a video for 10 minutes and then maybe answer a question or two, that's 15, 20 minutes. That's not something you're going to put off. But if you're thinking about, I have an hour lecture I need to watch, and then I have a paper to write that's going to take 3 hours at a sitting, that's just too much time.
Talk to me about the average student and what you've seen change over time. 30 plus years. Your biography says 30 plus years in education. How have the students changed over that time?
Well, at the beginning, it was a lot of older students looking to change a career, get into a new life path, those types of students. Over time, the ages have become much younger. We used to say that we didn't get the high school students. Well, now we do. Laddering is a very important part of people's planning for their careers and their lives these days. If I'm a young person and I'm thinking that maybe nursing is something for me, rather than immediately jumping into a 4-year Bachelor of Nursing program, I might take a 6-month healthcare aid program. Get me in the doors. Let me look at what the environment is like. What is it like to work in healthcare? Is this something I can do? Unfortunately, again, in career colleges, we hear a lot of stories of people who have gone in one path and found it's not for them. And I have heard those stories. One of my favorites is a graphic design student I had who turned out to be a brilliant student, had a master's in chemical engineering. And I asked him, why are you in my class when you can be out there working for much more money than any artist will ever make? And he said, well, my parents wanted me to go into that, not me.
So true.
And he found that he did it. He was good at it, but he didn't enjoy the work. Now he is a very successful graphic designer and much happier.
Yeah, but if you're having fun, work is fun. Day goes faster. You're happier when you get home too, right? So
That's it exactly.
and one thing I know about you, you love work. You actually enjoy your job, don't you?
I do. I live to work. Many people work to live, but I do live to work.
You've got an energy about you that you're always bringing to the table. So you've talked a little bit about the changes in the students. Let's talk about the change in the programs. I know right now, from what I know of the Herzing Group, very big in healthcare and technology right now. Still doing quite a bit of work in finance, accounting kind of areas. But talk to me about the trend lines that you guys have seen within the Herzing Group.
A lot of the courses and a lot of the structures are very similar. Some of our courses we've been delivering for literally decades, obviously with updates and upgrades and paying attention to the content. But a lot of the ways that we're teaching things, that's what's changed. The content itself is much the same. The learning outcomes from a healthcare aid program, say 5 years ago, are very similar to what they are now. Of course, there are changes in those areas, but the way that we deliver that material still is very similar. We want to get across theoretical material through a combination of interaction and watching things, so watching a video, reading materials, but also interacting with your peers, interacting with faculty, and interacting in some cases with employers on the work experience itself. Those things generally haven't changed. How we reach a student, that has changed. Lectures are pretty much a thing of the past. Teachers standing in front of a class delivering information doesn't make sense in an environment where we can have those as recorded videos. So then the student can then access those videos at their own time and watch them again. I loved going to school, but very often I would get home and the lecture that made sense an hour ago doesn't anymore. I really wanted to be able to go back and watch it again, but obviously I couldn't. But with a recorded lecture, you certainly can. You can pause it, you can stop it, you can listen to it on a bus on your way to work.
I had a little bit of a problem with the UMSU pub, the University of Manitoba Student Union pub, which would often be visited after class. So therefore, I didn't always retain everything. It would be nice to be able to go back and look at the video again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it is also a nice thing to be able to do it in those bite-sized chunks, not that long block. Myself, I have fairly extreme ADHD, so my first attempts at university were absolutely disastrous. My first year of university had a grade point average of 0.32. When I finally managed to get to a point where I was able to focus and deal with my issues, I graduated summa cum laude from my first bachelor's degree. And it was that experience that helped me appreciate what students are going through, and especially a student who's trying to juggle all of the things. It's different when you're a student who's just come from high school. All you have is university. That's your only focus, maybe a part-time job. But if you're an adult with kids, a job, you've got so much more on your mind than just school. So being able to fit school into that environment, that's really what's changed. Trying to make it accessible, trying to remove the barriers. A lot of the traditional systems were set up in such a way that made it difficult for students to do the work and to get there. And in some cases, it was designed specifically for that. And career colleges have done a lot of work in trying to remove those barriers.
Interesting. Well, thank you first off for opening up about that, because that's a unique challenge that people don't always talk about their own challenges, which I think it's important to understand. It takes me back to Rick Butler, who I had on from Loken College, and we asked him a question. He started talking about his wife and how she was the most important mentor for him in the business because she taught him how to look at every student differently. Every student has a different path and a different way. Before I come back to you, my come around to this is you can do that in a class of 12, 14, 16 in a career college, or 20, can't you, Robin?
Absolutely. You can't do it with a class of 200.
I remember sitting in lectures with 200 students at university and enjoying them, thoroughly enjoying them. But how much did I get out of it? No idea at times, right? Compared to that group of 20 or 30 people. And it leads me to the next point, which a lot of our programs, you referenced it, have practicums where you physically hands-on do things. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? I know you teach healthcare aid programs in Manitoba. You referenced that earlier. And also, by the way, you've campuses in Toronto, too?
Yes, we have 2 in Toronto.
And 1 in Ottawa, and they do different things. So why not a little bit about the Herzing group and the different colleges? Because I don't think many people realize that Herzing also has kind of skilled trades expertise. But then talk about practicums a little bit and what that means for students.
Herzing has always been about teaching students how to do things. Our courses and our programs are practically based. So the ability to translate what they're learning, their theoretical components, into actual work tasks and functions is a critical part of the education process. One of my favorite sayings that I often say to students and for faculty is that in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice, there is. And it's that gap, that problem, that internships really help to bridge. We hire faculty from industry rather than hiring teachers because we want them to tell the stories. The textbook says this, reality will tell you this. And those are the things we want in the classroom. But even that's not enough. The students need to see it in practice about how the classroom is talked about. This is the perfect environment, the perfect setup that will never exist. So in reality, this is what really happens.
It reminds me, and I've actually referenced this direct comment, but General Rick Hillier, former head of Canada's military, used to say, make a plan and at 70% start marching because your plan will not survive first contact with the enemy anyway. It's kind of the same thing. Train for everything you best you can, but you really got to get hands down and work with people. The people who run those practicums, they're people who have done the job too. Like it's not a teacher who's been taught how to teach. They've actually done the job, right?
Exactly. Absolutely. And they need to get across to the student all of those little things, that where the book says this, but this is actually the situation. One of the best stories that one of our faculty tells our healthcare aid students was when she was a nurse and she was working in palliative care. And she had a gentleman who was in palliative care, which meant that he was end of life, and he really wanted a beer. Now, his throat was at a position where he could not swallow liquids. So she went out and found a way to thicken the beer so that he could have a beer. Now, she tells this story and she tells how this was done, that the charge nurse never found out about it because if they had, she would have been in trouble. The family never found out about it because if they had, she would have been in trouble. But again, these are the things for that patient. That man's last minutes, that man's last hours were made better because somebody went away from the book and looked at what is the real reason I'm here right now. And instead of just focusing on the book tells me this or rules tell me that.
Yep, as long as the safety of the patient is considered at all times, then that's a good outcome. And I've had the fortune of doing a lot of work around as a volunteer around palliative care with the Canadian Hospice Palliative Care Association. Those people are angels that do that job. And I've gone through a few experiences now in my own life with friends and family. You got to give people a bit of moment of enjoyment as they're going through that.
Absolutely. There's a time for the rules and theory, and there's a time that you need to move away from that.
I was recently in Sault Ste. Marie with one of our colleges and had the pleasure of sitting in the care home, having a conversation about the people that graduate from that college and how it works, getting some ideas of how we can improve our program. And got into a conversation with the nurse that runs the practicum inside the care home. And she said, I get that there's 400 hours of lessons and there's 300 hours of practicum, but really, this is all about 300 hours of practicum where we find out if somebody can have compassion and empathy for a patient, which is part of what we're teaching, but you get out of those class sizes, isn't it?
It is absolutely correct. There's the good stories, and then there's the bad stories. The one that stuck with me that I remember from standing outside of classrooms, because as the dean, you always want to lurk to find out how well your faculty are doing. And I remember being outside the class when a healthcare aide was telling the students about an experience she had when she was just starting in the field, that an older healthcare aide yelled down a hallway to a gentleman, "It's time to get your diaper on." That man had decades of life before all of this, and somehow it's now reduced to a diaper. And she tells the students that you will never, ever call it that. And you will never do those types of things. You need to treat these people with the respect they deserve.
Tell me about Herzing. We jumped over it. Tell me about your campuses. I know the one in Winnipeg. I grew up driving by it.
Mm-hmm.
There was two things I would do leaving River Heights. So eventually you drive by Herzing College and you'd see the humbug sign on the apartment building, which if you're from Winnipeg, you know the story. It's famous. I think it's 70 years that sign's been up or something.
It is.
Incredible. Yeah, it's been moved and back or whatever. But talk to me about your colleges and the kind of things you teach at Herzing across Canada.
We teach primarily in the healthcare and business and technology, and we are moving into the trades. Our Toronto campus has an extensive trades campus that teaches a number of different programs, including plumbing and gas and electrical. We're actually just starting a trades program in Winnipeg. They are just starting construction, I believe, this week. And we're looking at offering plumbing and refrigeration and air conditioning mechanic.
Huge need.
Absolutely. Huge need. And we're trying to find innovative ways that we can deliver these programs and access remoter communities. We're looking at that with healthcare, looking at it with trades, looking at it with all of our programs.
Interesting. The government just gazetted a notice here that we're going to reply to on behalf of our members around loan forgiveness and better financing for students who are going to train healthcare in rural communities. Great opportunity. It's not just about nurses and doctors. It's also healthcare aides and dental office assistants and dental assistants. Really applauding the government of Canada, looking at unique ways to use student aid to get out into the rural communities.
And that is something that Herzing has worked on. Last year, we did a pilot project in Neepawa, which is a community about 2 hours away from Winnipeg. And we set up a pilot project where all of the theory is delivered online. The practicals were done on location in that community, and the clinicals were arranged also within that community itself. So some of the students never made it to Winnipeg. And that was a pilot because we want to take that model and move it somewhere farther. Thompson, the Paw, Nunavut. We want to be able to teach in remote communities so that they can have educated folks who want to stay there.
More likely to stay. And we have such a desire to see some of this work into Indigenous communities to help those people with the projects that are so crucial to their health and safety.
And the problem is that they're so busy doing the work that we don't have time to kind of work out the details and the infrastructure and all of the logistics that we would need to get it working. But we're actually starting to look at third parties to try to get this moving in some of those communities.
So that leads me to your regulator then and your government. You must have a good relationship with them there.
We have an excellent relationship here in Manitoba. Ontario as well. We have a very good inspector. They're very responsive to our questions when we reach out. And in Manitoba, they involve us in the decisions and policy making.
I'm going to say this. I think I know your answer, but we're not afraid of regulation, are we?
Absolutely not. Regulation keeps us honest, so to speak. It's the kind of thing that gives us our rails that we can operate within.
We just want consistency of regulation so we know where we stand.
That's the key.
Because at some point, you've got an owner, Mr. Herzing, who I've had the pleasure of meeting, a lovely gentleman, but he makes massive investments in the college, $1 million investments.
Absolutely.
And that's what I think the main difference from us in the community college and the university sector is we, our owners, are personally making those risky investments to do this training work. So that's why I say we don't mind regulation, but give us consistent regulation so we can make plans. That's the international student, although we are a very, very small part of that cohort of people who came to Canada. the inconsistency of the regulation made it very difficult for some of our colleges. Very few, but some of them.
And in some cases, the regulations themselves are behind where we are. And that is something else that, we get in Manitoba. We're able to work with the ministry that closely and let them know when we've got gaps in those areas. Online was a good example. In Manitoba, we had full funding for online training in 2015.
Wow, that's as early as I've heard anywhere, I believe. I'm still learning this sector, but let me go back to you. We always ask two questions of people, so I'll start with the first one. It's an interesting one when you mentioned the ADHD. What's the skill that's made you successful in life, and did you develop it earlier or later?
I think the skill is making. I grew up on a farm in between Winnipeg Beach and Kilmarnock. And for somebody with ADHD on a farm with nothing, it can make you go a little crazy. So I learned how to make things. I started making things out of paper and any other materials. I make all kinds of things. I've made the tie and the shirt that I'm wearing now. I have made lighting fixtures for my house. I make all kinds of furniture elements. I make documents. I write programs. And I wouldn't be that if I wasn't desperately finding some way to occupy myself way back.
I was going to say earlier, but I'll say it now. It's a shame we don't do video on this podcast. I would have had to clean up a little bit today, but Robin has got a spectacular bow tie on, which he always does. It's nice to see.
Thank you.
And it's a good segue to me to be personal with Robin, because in a couple of weeks, I'm going to have the pleasure of giving him a King's Coronation Medal for his 30 years of service to our nation and service to our sector. So congratulations on that, Robin.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Looking forward to that ceremony going back to Winnipeg. It's always fun. There's always a few places I may have to stop at Ray and Jerry's, because that's a part of the world that never changes.
Oh, no, it doesn't.
Nothing ever changes, although I think I saw some new fabric on one of the benches, but it's an institution in Winnipeg.
It certainly is.
I'm going to save a question for last that we finish on, but what is your favorite part of this sector? What do you love the most about being in the career? You're out of the classroom now, but what makes you get so excited to be at that front door at 7:30?
It has always been the students, and it's the special students. And I use the word special in all different meanings of that term. A lot of our students are folks that have been through the public education system, many of them unsuccessfully. So when they come to us, they're coming to us with the feeling that I can't do school. And we show them that they can, and they can do it well. And the person on the other end of that is so much more confident, so much more present, and so much more, I hesitate to use the word alive, really is a transformation. And it has only a small amount to do with their increased earning potential. It has everything to do with their increased confidence. One of my favorite student stories was when we had a grad, and I was cleaning up, and grad had ended about 45 minutes previously. And we had finished cleaning up, and we were walking to the front doors of the auditorium, and there was a student there. And she waited specifically so that she could tell us about how she had failed at every single experience in education until she came to Herzing. And she was one of our honors students. And it was very important to her that she let us know that we were the ones who showed her that she could be more than she was previously.
Incredible. I love those stories. I thought you'd go students. I thought you might go graduation ceremonies. You kind of did both. I speak at every graduation ceremony I get invited to that I can possibly make it to, because often the family's 10 or 12 guests.
Mm-hmm.
Kids, husbands, parents, first person to graduate from a post-secondary education system. The excitement is absolutely incredible, isn't it, to be in the room for it?
It really is. And speaking of grads, one of the mentors that I've had that I really looked up to was our past president, Bill Riches at Herzing College in Winnipeg. Amazing president, one of the best presidents Herzing has ever had. And he tells a story at grad about how one of his first grads, he was shaking a woman's hand who had just received her diploma. And this little boy, about 5 or 6, comes running to the front of the stage, points up on stage and yells out, "That's my mom."
That's awesome.
And it was just such a moment of pride and of recognition that was the moment that he carried to every single graduation. He told that story at every grad thereafter.
I've got a statement, a question, and then a final question. So I was at the Willis College graduation in Ottawa, which I find interesting because it's literally a wing away from you inside the Saint Laurent Mall.
It's true. We're neighbors.
And I'll get to the mall part of it first, but at the graduation, there was a mother and a daughter graduating from different programs. And it was like, how can you not be excited about that?
That is absolutely thrilling. I remember having healthcare aides. We had 3 students, grandmother, mother, and daughter, all graduate from the same program. And they were coming through in the last week of their daughter's schooling, and we were looking at the grad photos, and we found the photos of the mother and the photo of the grandmother.
Oh, that's incredible. The thing about the sector I love is you compete for students at times, but you also work together and you also prop each other up.
We do.
Willis around the corner from you has a program where military veterans can bring a spouse free of charge because they're more successful having someone around that helps them drag through. So what I found interesting about you both being so close to each other and not caring, it's because of why we're there. And when the Minister of Immigration hit us earlier last year, talking about being in strip malls and shopping malls, I think I know why you're there, but why are you in that mall, Robin? Why is Herzing College at Saint Laurent Mall?
We're in malls because that's where the people are. We are where the people are, and we want to be accessible. We want to be a place that people can come to drop in, to look at what's going on. We want to be as accessible as possible so that somebody isn't feeling that they can't, or that they shouldn't, or that somebody is going to tell them they won't. Everyone at Herzing will tell somebody you can.
Somebody can take a split shift working in retail and take a 3-hour seminar in the afternoon between that, or transit's there, the food court's there, free parking. There's a lot of reasons why it makes sense. And look past the cover, you might be surprised at what's going on inside that institution. So finish up with the last question I usually ask. And, sometimes I throw in one more, but I'm going to ask you one, and you already leaned into a mentor. But do you have a mentor you want to talk about? And the reason we do this, we like our listeners to understand that they can be one every day, or they can still look for one. I know I'm 56 years old in a couple of weeks, and I've still got mentors that I lean into. Some of them are friends. Some of my friends are idiots, and I hope they're listening. Some of them are also mentors that I lean on and ask questions to.
Well, some folks exist just to be an example for others.
Not my circus, not my clowns some days, right? Talk to me about a mentor that's made a difference for you.
I always go back to my father. My father was a massive influence in my life. He was an engineer. He worked on the Avro Arrow. He had a workshop in his basement. He had a drafting board. He could make literally anything. I remember him, bringing instructions and drawings to welding teams and machinists to make things for him, to solve problems around the house or the farm, or all of those types of things. And I absolutely idolized him. And he always taught me that there is no problem that you cannot solve through the correct application of the right steps and keeping at it. He viewed failure as a step on the path to success.
It really is. And I appreciate you sharing that. I appreciate you sharing the comment about the ADHD, because that was part of your journey too, right? In a different kind of way of mentoring you to get through something that you had to work your way through. So I'm going to ask you one last question and say, if there's anything that you want to chat about too, you didn't get a chance to talk about, you'd like to, but I'd like to know from you, if you were a student right now looking at a career college in Canada, why would you think it's the path for you? Because it's not for everybody, right? But it's for some.
Well, I would likely be thinking of career colleges because I would want to get into the workforce quickly. I would also like to have focus on practical things. Now, don't get me wrong, algorithmic analysis was my favorite class in university, but there is something to be said for things that you can use, things you can apply. It's one thing to learn how to make a spreadsheet. It's another thing to learn how to rewire a socket, because everybody has a socket in their house. Not everybody has a spreadsheet. So career colleges are that more connected to the practical, that teach you more practical skills that you can use absolutely every day. And a lot of our programs teach things that even if you never worked in the field, you'd still use.
What an incredible way of looking at it. I've marked a couple of notes here today for myself. I really appreciate your time. If you met Robin and I event, you'd probably say those two guys have as little in common as two people you'd think. But he's become one of my favorite people around this association because he puts his back into it, but he's focused on the students. And it comes across in every meeting and every conversation, Robin. And I count on you as a friend now. And I have jokingly say people would think we're the opposites. You're a little quieter than I am, but you dress a little louder than me.
I certainly do.
We like to have a little fun here. Robin Day, thank you for joining me today, the National Director of Academics for Herzing College. I think this has been kind of a fun conversation, but also a really serious one about why the things we do are important. And with that, I'll thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to episode 48 next week, coming out on the EdUp Canada podcast. Thanks, Robin.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the EdUp Canada podcast. We release new episodes regularly, so make sure you hit that subscribe button so you know when they are officially out. If you love this episode, please leave a 4 or 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts so that others can also discover how a set of skills can lead to success. Thanks for learning with us.